The cold wind howled across the surface of the ruined moon. Dust and ash covered the rocky landscape, and broken remains of Scifi warships lay scattered everywhere. The battle had ended, but for Princess Valrica, it was far from over. She lay among the wreckage, her body weak, her vision blurry. Her silver armor was cracked, and deep cuts covered her pale blue skin. Blood dripped from her forehead as she tried to move. Every muscle in her body screamed in pain, but she clenched her teeth. She could not give up. Valrica was the daughter of the Scifi Emperor, once surrounded by luxury and power. But now, she was nothing more than a forgotten soldier, abandoned by her own people. The Scifi had retreated, leaving her behind. The enemy, the Dracan Dominion, had searched the battlefield for survivors, but had left her alone, thinking she was as good as dead. Her breathing was shallow as she looked up at the dark sky. Stars twinkled above, distant and unreachable. She wanted to scream, to call for help, but there was no one left to hear her. Her people had left her to die. Then she heard footsteps. Valrica's heart pounded. Was it the Dracan? Had they returned to finish the job? She forced herself to stay still, her fingers tightening around the hilt of a broken blade. If they came closer, she would fight. She would not let them take her easily. But the figure that emerged from the smoke was not a Dracan soldier. It was something else. Something human. The man moved cautiously, scanning the wreckage with sharp eyes. He wore a brown jacket over an old combat suit, and a rifle was strapped to his back. His short, dark hair was messy, and his face was covered in dust. He looked like a scavenger, someone searching for valuable scraps from the battlefield. Valrica's grip on her blade tightened. Humans were unpredictable. Some were allies, some were enemies. But most of all, humans were known for their survival instincts. They did what they had to do to live. The man turned his head and froze. His gaze locked onto Valrica's weak body. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, against all her instincts, Valrica whispered, "Help me." The human hesitated. His expression was unreadable. He looked around, as if checking if anyone else was watching, then took a step closer. "You're still alive." His voice was rough, but not unkind. Valrica swallowed her pride and nodded weakly, barely. The man sighed and knelt beside her. Up close, she could see his sharp features and the exhaustion in his dark eyes. He studied her wounds, then shook his head. "You're lucky I found you. You should be dead." I know." Her voice was faint. "But I'm not." He seemed to consider something, then reached into his bag and pulled out a small medical kit. "Can you move?" Valrica tried to push herself up, but pain shot through her body. She gasped and collapsed back onto the ground. The human clicked his tongue. "Yeah, that's what I thought." She expected him to leave her. A scavenger had no reason to help a dying alien princess. But instead, he took out a small injector and pressed it against her arm. A cooling sensation spread through her body, dulling the pain. She blinked in confusion. "Why? Why are you helping me?" The man exhaled and sat back on his heels. "Because you're still breathing." His words confused her. The Scifi only helped those who could benefit them. The Dracan only helped their own. But this human, he was different. "Who are you?" she asked weakly. He hesitated, then said, "Daniel." She had heard of humans before. Their kind had built a reputation in the galaxy. Reckless, stubborn, and fearless. Some called them dangerous. Others called them fools. But at this moment, Daniel was her only hope. He looked at the sky and frowned. "This place isn't safe. If the Dracan come back, we're both dead." Valrica forced herself to sit up, despite the pain. "Then we need to leave." Daniel smirked. "You make it sound easy." She narrowed her eyes. "Don't humans love impossible challenges?" He chuckled. "You know us well." Valrica's body was weak, but her mind was sharp. She had been abandoned, left to die. But she was still alive. And now, she had an ally, a human, of all things. The battle for survival had just begun. Daniel pulled a small canteen from his bag and handed it to Valrica. She hesitated for a moment before taking it, her fingers weak but steady. She drank slowly, letting the cool water ease the dryness in her throat. Every movement sent pain through her body, but she forced herself to focus. She was alive, and she would not waste this chance. Daniel watched her closely, his sharp eyes scanning her injuries. "We need to move," he said finally. "The Drakan might send patrols soon. If they find us, we won't get a second chance." Valrica nodded. She knew he was right. The Drakan were ruthless. If they discovered her still breathing, they would finish what they started. But moving was easier said than done. Her legs trembled as she tried to stand, and she nearly collapsed. Daniel caught her before she hit the ground. "Whoa there, princess." He adjusted his grip, carefully lifting her arm over his shoulder. "You're tougher than you look, but you're in no condition to walk far." Valrica swallowed her pride. "Then you'll have to carry me." Daniel smirked. "You're lucky I'm not the kind to leave people behind." With that, he bent down and lifted her onto his back. She was light, despite her armor, but he could feel the tension in her body. She was strong, determined to survive. They moved carefully through the wreckage of the battlefield. Broken ships, shattered weapons, and the remains of fallen soldiers surrounded them. The air smelled of burnt metal and dust, a bitter reminder of the battle that had taken place. Valrica felt a wave of anger rise in her chest. She had been abandoned, left to die, like she was nothing. But she was still here, and she would make sure her people regretted leaving her behind. "What were you doing out here?" Daniel asked as they walked. "You don't seem like the type to be left behind by accident." Valrica's jaw tightened. "I was leading my soldiers in battle. We were supposed to hold the line while the main fleet retreated." Daniel glanced at her. "And they just left you." She looked away. "They made their choice." There was a long silence. Then Daniel sighed. "I've seen it before. People in power always think they're untouchable. They don't care who they sacrifice as long as they stay safe." Valrica frowned. "And what about humans? Are you saying your kind is any different?" Daniel chuckled. "Oh, we're just as messy as everyone else, but we don't leave our own behind. At least, not the ones worth saving." Valrica didn't reply. She wasn't sure what to think about this human. He was different from the stories she had heard. The Exilari saw humans as reckless and dangerous, but Daniel was neither careless nor cruel. He had no reason to help her, yet he had chosen to. "Where are we going?" she asked finally. Daniel adjusted his grip on her. "There's an old supply bunker about 1 kilometer from here. If it's still intact, we can find shelter and supplies." 1 kilometer. In her condition, it might as well have been 1,000. But she had no choice. She closed her eyes for a moment, focusing on her breathing. The pain was still there, but she could endure it. She had to. They moved in silence for a while, the only sounds coming from the wind and the distant echoes of destruction. Valrica could feel Daniel's heartbeat against her back, steady and calm. It was strange, comforting, even. Then, suddenly, Daniel stopped. Valrica tensed. "What is it?" He didn't answer right away. He lowered her gently behind a piece of wreckage and raised his rifle. His eyes scanned the area, his body still and alert. Then she heard it, a low, mechanical hum. Drakan patrol drones. Valrica's blood ran cold. If the drones spotted them, they would alert the nearest enemy outpost, and in her current state, she wouldn't be able to fight. Daniel pulled a small device from his belt and pressed a button. A faint pulse of energy spread outward, disrupting the air around them. "Signal jammer," he whispered. "It'll keep us hidden, but only for a few minutes." The drones hovered closer, their glowing red sensors scanning the battlefield. Valrica held her breath, her fingers tightening around the broken blade she still carried. If they were caught, she would not go down without a fight. The drones paused, their sensors flickering. For a moment, Valrica thought they had been detected. But then, the machines turned and drifted away, disappearing into the smoky horizon. Daniel let out a slow breath. That was too close. Valrica exhaled, her body relaxing slightly. "You're full of surprises, human." Daniel grinned. "Stick with me, princess. I've got a few more tricks up my sleeve." They continued forward, moving as quickly as they could without drawing attention. Valrica's strength was fading, but she refused to let it stop her. She would not be a burden. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the bunker. It was old, covered in dust and rust, but still standing. Daniel approached the entrance and pulled out a small hacking tool. "Give me a second." Valrica leaned against the wall, her body heavy with exhaustion. But despite everything, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The lock clicked, and the heavy door creaked open. Daniel turned to her with a smirk. "Welcome to your new home, princess." For the first time since the battle, Valrica allowed herself a small smile. She wasn't alone anymore, and she was going to survive. The bunker's air was thick with dust, untouched for years. Old crates and rusted tools were scattered across the metal floor. Dim emergency lights flickered weakly, casting shadows across the narrow hallways. It wasn't much, but to Valrica, it was better than the battlefield. Daniel stepped inside first, sweeping his rifle across the room. "Looks clear," he muttered. "We'll be safe here for now." Valrica limped in behind him, her body heavy with exhaustion. She leaned against the cold metal wall, taking deep breaths. Every muscle in her body ached, but she forced herself to stay alert. She had been raised to be a warrior, a leader. She would not fall apart now. Daniel walked to an old console and pressed a few buttons. The screen flickered to life, showing a map of the bunker. "Not bad," he said. "Looks like there's a storage room down the hall. We might find medical supplies." Valrica nodded. "Then let's move." Daniel glanced at her injured leg. "You sure you can walk?" She straightened. "I'm not as weak as I look, human." Daniel smirked. "Didn't say you were. Just don't want you passing out on me." She rolled her eyes but said nothing. They moved carefully through the bunker, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The silence was unsettling, like the place itself had been abandoned long ago. Daniel led the way, his instincts sharp, while Valrica followed closely, gripping her broken blade. When they reached the storage room, the door was locked. Daniel pulled out his hacking tool again and started working on the panel. Valrica crossed her arms. "You seem to know a lot about breaking into places." Daniel chuckled. "Let's just say I've had some practice." Before she could question him further, the door clicked open. Inside, metal shelves lined the walls, filled with old supplies. Dust-covered boxes sat in the corners, untouched for years. Daniel stepped inside and started searching. "Bingo," he muttered, pulling out a small metal case. He opened it, revealing medical supplies, bandages, antiseptics, and painkillers. "This should help." He turned to Valrica. "Sit down. I need to patch you up." She hesitated. "I can handle it myself." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, with one hand." Valrica scowled but knew he was right. With a sigh, she sat on a nearby crate, letting him kneel beside her. He worked quickly, cutting away the torn fabric of her armor to reach the wound on her leg. The sight of the deep gash made Valrica tense, but Daniel didn't hesitate. He poured antiseptic over the wound. A sharp sting shot through her leg, and she clenched her jaw. "Damn you, human," she muttered. Daniel smirked. "You're welcome." He wrapped the bandage tightly around her leg, securing it with practiced hands. "That should hold for now. Just try not to get stabbed again." Valrica sighed. "I'll do my best." Daniel leaned back, stretching his arms. "All right, princess. Now that you're patched up, we need a plan." Valrica met his gaze. "I need to get off this planet. The Drakan will be hunting for survivors. If they find me, they'll kill me. Daniel nodded. Makes sense. But there's one problem. She narrowed her eyes. What? He sighed. I don't have a ship. Valrica's heart sank. Then how did you get here? Daniel leaned against the crate. I was part of a mercenary crew. We took a job to transport supplies to a rebel group fighting the Drakan. But when things went south, my ship got shot down. I was the only survivor. Valrica frowned. So you're stranded too? Daniel nodded. For now. Silence filled the room. The situation was worse than she thought. Without a ship, they had no way off the planet, and every moment they stayed, the danger grew. Valrica clenched her fists. We need to find a way out. There must be a ship somewhere. Daniel rubbed his chin. There is one possibility. She looked at him sharply. What? He hesitated. The Drakan have a base not far from here. They have ships. If we can sneak in, we might be able to steal one. Valrica's eyes widened. You want to infiltrate a Drakan base? Are you insane? Daniel grinned. Probably, but it's our best shot. Valrica exhaled, considering his words. The plan was risky, borderline suicidal. But what choice did they have? If they stayed, they would be found. If they ran, they would be hunted. The only way out was through. She looked into Daniel's eyes and saw no fear, only determination. She smirked. You really are reckless, human. Daniel chuckled. You'll get used to it. Valrica took a deep breath. All right, we steal a ship, but if we do this, we do it my way. Daniel shrugged. Fine by me. Just don't slow me down, princess. Valrica rolled her eyes. Try to keep up. For the first time in days, she felt something other than pain or anger. She felt alive. The bunker was quiet, except for the faint hum of old machinery. Daniel leaned over a rusted metal table, sketching out a rough map on a piece of scrap paper. Valrica stood beside him, arms crossed, studying the details. The Drakan base is about 10 kilometers east, Daniel said, tapping his finger on the map. Heavily guarded, but if we move at night, we can avoid most patrols. Valrica frowned. Even if we sneak in, we don't know where they keep their ships. We might run out of time before we find one. Daniel smirked. That's why we need a distraction. She raised an eyebrow. And how do you plan to do that? Daniel leaned back, arms behind his head. Explosives. Valrica gave him a sharp look. You have explosives. Daniel chuckled. Not yet. But this bunker belonged to an old resistance group. If we searched the storage areas, we might find something useful. Valrica sighed. You take too many risks, human. Daniel grinned. And yet, I'm still alive. She shook her head but couldn't deny the plan had merit. The Drakan were brutal warriors, but they weren't invincible. A well-placed explosion could cause enough chaos for them to slip into the base unnoticed. Fine, she said. Let's find those explosives. They split up to search the bunker. Valrica moved carefully through the dark hallways, stepping over broken crates and scattered debris. The air smelled of rust and damp metal. She opened an old supply locker, scanning the contents. Old rations, broken weapons, nothing useful. Just as she was about to give up, she spotted a heavy metal case at the back of the locker. She pried it open and her eyes widened. Inside were 3 small spherical devices, old but still functional. Grenades. She grabbed them and hurried back to Daniel. When she entered the main room, Daniel was already waiting, holding a dusty backpack filled with supplies. Found anything? He asked. Valrica tossed him one of the grenades. Will this do? Daniel caught it and whistled. Oh, princess, you just made my day. She rolled her eyes. Don't get too excited. We still have to survive this. Daniel grinned. That's the fun part. Nightfall came quickly. The sky was a deep shade of purple, the twin moons casting a dim glow over the wasteland. The air was cold, carrying the distant howls of alien creatures. Daniel and Valrica crouched behind a ridge overlooking the Draken base. From here, they could see the tall metal walls, the watchtowers, and the landing pad where several ships were docked. "There's our way out," Daniel whispered. Valrica studied the guards patrolling the perimeter. Too many for a direct fight. Daniel nodded. "That's why we're not fighting. We sneak in, plant the explosives near the fuel depot, and when they go off, we make a run for the nearest ship." Valrica exhaled. Simple plan. Too simple. Daniel smirked. Sometimes simple works. They moved quickly and silently, keeping to the shadows. The Draken were strong but relied on brute force, not stealth. As long as they stayed out of sight, they had a chance. Near the base's back wall, Daniel pulled out a small cutting tool. The metal glowed as he sliced through the fence, creating a narrow opening. "After you, princess," he whispered. Valrica slipped through first, her movement swift and precise. Daniel followed, pressing against the wall as a patrol passed nearby. "Stay low," Valrica murmured. "We need to get to the depot without being seen." They moved in the shadows, slipping past guards and security drones. The fuel depot was at the far end of the base, marked by massive storage tanks filled with highly flammable liquid. Daniel crouched near one of the tanks, pulling out the grenades. "All right. Once these go off, we'll have about 2 minutes before the whole place is in chaos." Valrica nodded. "Set them up. I'll watch your back." Daniel worked quickly, attaching the grenades to key points on the tanks. He set a remote detonator and gave a thumbs up. "Ready to run." Valrica smirked. "Always." They moved toward the landing pad, keeping low. Just as they reached the edge of the platform, Daniel pressed the detonator. Boom. The explosion rocked the base, sending fire and debris into the air. Alarms blared. Draken soldiers shouted in confusion, running toward the burning depot. "Time to go," Daniel shouted. They sprinted toward the nearest ship, dodging between crates and broken machinery. A Draken guard spotted them and raised his weapon, but before he could fire, Valrica threw a knife, striking him in the arm. He roared in pain as they rushed past. They reached the ship, a small, sleek fighter. The ramp was down, likely left open for a quick departure. Daniel rushed inside, heading straight for the cockpit. Valrica followed, sealing the door behind them. "Can you fly this thing?" she asked. Daniel grinned. "Let's find out." He pressed a few buttons, and the ship hummed to life. The controls were different from human ships, but flying was flying. He gripped the joystick and pulled back. The ship lifted off just as Draken soldiers arrived, firing at them. Energy blasts hit the hull, but the shields held. "Hang on," Daniel shouted. He pushed the thrusters to full, and the ship shot into the sky, leaving the burning base behind. Valrica slumped into the co-pilot seat, breathing heavily. "We made it." Daniel glanced at her, smirking. "Told you simple plans work." She chuckled. "You got lucky, human." Daniel laughed. "Maybe, but luck's just another word for good timing." As the stars stretched before them, Valrica looked at Daniel with new respect. For the first time, she truly believed they had a chance. The stolen fighter roared through the sky, leaving behind the burning Draken base. The deep blackness of space stretched before them, dotted with distant stars. Inside the cockpit, Daniel gripped the controls tightly, his eyes scanning the dashboard. The alien ship's systems were unfamiliar, but flying was second nature to him. Valrica sat beside him, strapping herself into the co-pilot seat. She glanced at the readings, her face tense. "You handled the takeoff well, but we are not safe yet." Daniel smirked. "Oh, I thought we were home free." Before she could respond, the ship's warning alarms blared. A red light flashed on the dashboard. Valrica quickly read the alien symbols and cursed under her breath. "Draken warships incoming," she said. "They must have tracked us." Daniel glanced at the radar. Two large blips were closing in fast. His grip tightened on the controls. Guess they really don't like it when someone steals their ships. Valrica's hands danced across the controls, searching for weapons. This ship isn't built for combat. It's a scout craft, fast, but lightly armed. Daniel grinned. Good thing I like fast. He pushed the thrusters to full power. The ship jolted forward, engines screaming as it sped through space. Behind them, two Drakan warships loomed, their dark hulls gleaming in the faint light of distant stars. A voice crackled through the ship's comms in the guttural language of the Drakan. Valrica translated without hesitation. They're ordering us to surrender, or be destroyed. Daniel chuckled. They always say that. Ever notice how bad guys never ask nicely? Valrica shook her head. I hope you have a plan, human. Daniel's eyes flicked across the controls. The Drakan ships were larger and more powerful, but that also meant they were slower. He needed a way to lose them, fast. Then he saw it. A dense asteroid field just a few thousand kilometers ahead. Hold on, princess. This is gonna get bumpy. He angled the ship toward the asteroid field and pushed the thrusters even harder. The engines roared as they shot forward, racing toward the massive floating rocks. Valrica's eyes widened. Are you insane? Flying through an asteroid field at this speed is suicide. Daniel smirked. Only if you don't know what you're doing. The ship plunged into the asteroid field. Giant rocks drifted lazily in the void, some spinning, others colliding with each other. Daniel's hands moved with precision, twisting the ship between the floating debris. He ducked under a massive asteroid, then spun sideways to squeeze through a narrow gap between two smaller ones. The Drakan warships hesitated at the edge of the field. Their size made maneuvering difficult, but they fired anyway. Bright beams of energy streaked through space, missing by mere meters. One shot struck a smaller asteroid, shattering it into dozens of fragments. The debris rained down toward their ship, and Daniel was forced to jerk the controls, narrowly avoiding a collision. I really hope you know what you're doing, Valrica shouted as she gripped her seat tightly. Mostly, Daniel admitted. The Drakan ships followed but struggled to keep up. Their large frames made dodging asteroids difficult. One of them took a direct hit from a tumbling rock, causing its shields to flicker. Valrica noticed and pointed. Their shields are weakening. If we can lead them into a collision, we might escape. Daniel grinned. Now you're thinking like a human. He twisted the ship sharply, heading toward the largest asteroid in sight. It was massive, easily the size of a city, slowly rotating in the darkness. Daniel guided their ship dangerously close to its surface, skimming just above the rocky terrain. The Drakan ships pursued, their weapons firing wildly. Then Daniel saw his chance. A deep canyon cut through the asteroid, barely wide enough for their ship. Hold on, he shouted. Valrica barely had time to react before Daniel dove into the canyon. The walls blurred past them, jagged rocks flashing by at terrifying speed. The Drakan ships hesitated but followed. The first warship entered the canyon, but its size made maneuvering difficult. Come on, just a little closer, Daniel muttered, keeping an eye on the ship behind them. The canyon twisted sharply, and Daniel knew the Drakan pilot wouldn't be able to turn fast enough. With a final twist of the controls, he pulled the ship up, escaping the canyon at the last second. The Drakan warship tried to follow. Crash. The massive vessel slammed into the canyon walls, exploding in a fiery burst of metal and debris. Valrica let out a breath of disbelief. You actually did it. Daniel grinned. Told you I like fast. The second Drakan warship pulled back, not willing to risk the same fate. Their ship was now free, speeding away into open space. Valrica exhaled, finally relaxing. We need to find a safe place to land and plan our next move. Daniel nodded. Agreed. But first, we need to figure out where we are. He pulled up the navigation screen. The ship's computer displayed a nearby system, an uncharted planet, covered in dense forests and deep oceans. Valrica studied the readings. It might be dangerous, but it's our best option. Daniel smirked. Dangerous? That's just another word for interesting. With a final push of the thrusters, the ship sped toward the unknown planet, leaving the Dracan behind, at least for now. The stolen scout ship entered the atmosphere of the uncharted planet, its hull glowing red from the heat. Daniel kept a firm grip on the controls, his eyes locked on the readings. The ship shook violently as turbulence rocked them from side to side. This landing is going to be rough, he muttered. Valrica checked the sensors. The planet has breathable air, but I'm detecting strong storms and unpredictable weather patterns. Great, just what we need, Daniel sighed. Thick clouds surrounded them as the ship descended. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the endless forests below. The trees stretched for miles, their dark green canopies looking more like a vast ocean than a jungle. Strong winds pushed against the ship, forcing Daniel to adjust the thrusters constantly. A loud warning beep filled the cockpit. Engines failing. Valrica read aloud. We don't have much time. Daniel gritted his teeth. Then let's make it count. He spotted a clearing ahead, a large open space surrounded by dense jungle. It wasn't perfect, but it was their best chance. He pulled the controls up slightly, slowing the descent. The ship hit the ground hard. Metal screeched as it slid across the rocky terrain, sending dirt and debris flying. Finally, after several terrifying seconds, the ship came to a stop. Smoke rose from the damaged thrusters. Sparks flickered from the control panels. Silence. Daniel exhaled and unstrapped himself. Well, that was fun. Valrica shot him an unimpressed look. You call that fun? We almost died. Daniel grinned. Yeah, but we didn't. She rolled her eyes but didn't argue. Instead, she checked the ship's condition. The engines are badly damaged. We won't be flying anytime soon. Daniel glanced outside. The thick jungle surrounded them, its massive trees stretching high into the sky. Strange sounds echoed through the forest. Animal calls, rustling leaves, and distant howls. Looks like we're stuck here for a while, he said. Valrica sighed. Then we need to gather supplies and secure the area. We don't know what kind of predators live here. Daniel grabbed his backpack and checked his gear. Let's go explore, then. They stepped out of the ship, the fresh air hitting them immediately. The scent of damp earth and wild plants filled their noses. The gravity was slightly heavier than what Daniel was used to, but not unbearable. As they walked, Valrica examined the vegetation. This planet has a strong ecosystem. Some of these plants might be edible. Daniel smirked. As long as they don't eat us first. Valrica didn't respond. She was focused on scanning the area, her sharp eyes studying every detail. They moved deeper into the jungle. The trees were massive, their trunks covered in glowing moss. Strange, bird-like creatures fluttered between the branches, watching them with curious eyes. Suddenly, a loud growl echoed through the trees. Daniel and Valrica froze. That didn't sound friendly, Daniel muttered. Valrica grabbed his arm and pointed. There, something's coming. From the shadows of the jungle, a large creature emerged. It was reptilian, with thick armored scales and glowing yellow eyes. Its long tail swayed behind it, and its sharp claws dug into the dirt. The creature growled again, locking its gaze onto them. We should run, Valrica whispered. Daniel smirked. You say that like I had other plans. The creature charged. Daniel and Valrica sprinted back toward the ship, dodging through the thick undergrowth. The beast crashed through the trees behind them, its heavy footsteps shaking the ground. Daniel spotted a fallen tree ahead. Jump. They leaped over it just as the creature swiped at them. Its claws scraped against the bark, sending splinters flying. The ship was in sight. Valrica glanced back. It's still chasing us. Daniel pulled out his pistol and fired a few shots. The energy blasts hit the creature's thick hide, barely slowing it down. "Yeah, that's not working," he said. Valrica grabbed his arm. "Get inside. Now." They dashed up the ramp and slammed the door shut just as the beast lunged. Its massive body crashed against the metal, shaking the entire ship. It roared in frustration, clawing at the hull. Daniel and Valrica backed away, breathing heavily. "That thing is persistent," Daniel said. Valrica nodded. "We need a plan. If it doesn't leave, we're trapped here." Daniel glanced at the controls. The weapons system was offline, and the engines were too damaged to lift off. But there had to be another way. Then an idea hit him. "Wait here," he told Valrica. She frowned. "What are you doing?" Daniel grabbed a flare from his pack. "Making a distraction." Before Valrica could stop him, he opened the emergency hatch at the top of the ship and climbed out. The beast immediately turned its attention to him, growling. Daniel smirked. "Hey, ugly. Catch." He tossed the flare into the jungle. It burst into bright flames, lighting up the trees. The creature roared and charged after it, drawn to the sudden fire. Daniel quickly climbed back inside and shut the hatch. Valrica stared at him. That was reckless. He grinned. "Yeah, but it worked." Outside, the creature growled in confusion, circling the burning flare. Then, with one final snarl, it disappeared into the jungle. Daniel let out a breath of relief. Well, that was a nice welcome to the planet. Valrica shook her head but couldn't help smiling. "Let's just focus on fixing the ship before something worse shows up." Daniel chuckled. Agreed. They weren't safe yet, but for now, they had a chance. Daniel sat on a crate inside the damaged ship, carefully wiping sweat from his forehead. His heart was still pounding from their recent encounter with the jungle beast. Outside, the strange sounds of the alien wilderness continued. Distant howls, rustling leaves, and the occasional screech of unknown creatures. Valrica was at the control panel, analyzing their ship's condition. Her fingers moved swiftly across the cracked screen, her expression tense. "The thrusters are still down, and the power core is unstable. If we don't fix it soon, we're stranded here for good." Daniel leaned back. "Well, that's not an option. We didn't come all this way to end up some jungle monster's dinner." Valrica sighed. "I've rerouted some auxiliary power, but we need a new energy source for the core. Without it, the ship won't even lift off the ground." Daniel rubbed his chin. "So we need to find something strong enough to power this ship. Any ideas?" Valrica hesitated. "There is one possibility, but it's dangerous." Daniel chuckled. "At this point, danger is just another part of my day. What's the plan?" She turned the screen toward him, displaying a map of the surrounding area. "I scanned the jungle earlier and detected a strange energy signature about 2 miles from here. It's powerful, but I don't know what it is. If we can get to it, maybe we can use it to power the ship." Daniel stood up, stretching his arms. "All right, let's go check it out. How bad could it be?" Valrica gave him a pointed look. "You just had to say that, didn't you?" They moved carefully through the dense jungle, avoiding the large predators that roamed the area. Valrica led the way, her scanner guiding them toward the energy source. The glowing moss on the trees provided faint light, but the deeper they went, the darker and more unsettling the jungle became. Daniel kept his hand close to his weapon. "I don't like this. Feels like we're being watched." Valrica nodded. "Stay alert. We're close." Suddenly, the scanner beeped rapidly. Valrica stopped in her tracks. "It's here." Before them was a massive tree, unlike anything they had seen before. Its bark pulsed with a faint blue glow, and at its base, a cluster of strange, crystal-like formations hummed with energy. The air around them felt charged, like standing near a storm. Daniel whistled. "That's gotta be what we need." Valrica stepped closer, carefully scanning the crystals. "The energy readings are off the charts. If we extract a core sample, It might be enough to jumpstart the ship. Daniel knelt beside her. All right, let's do it fast. I don't want to stay here longer than we have to. Valrica pulled out a small cutting tool and carefully removed a chunk of the glowing crystal. The moment she did, the entire tree trembled. A deep, echoing sound filled the air, almost like a warning. Daniel grabbed her arm. Time to go. The jungle erupted with movement. Shadows darted between the trees, glowing eyes appearing all around them. The creatures weren't like the one from before. These were smaller, faster, and there were dozens of them. They moved like a pack, circling their prey. Valrica clutched the crystal fragment tightly. They're protecting the energy source. Daniel fired a warning shot into the air. Not today, buddy. The creatures screeched and lunged. Daniel and Valrica ran. The jungle seemed to close in around them, the creatures weaving through the trees effortlessly. They were outnumbered and outmatched. Daniel glanced at Valrica. How much farther to the ship? Less than a mile, she yelled back. The creatures were gaining on them. One of them leaped forward, swiping at Daniel's back. He stumbled but managed to stay on his feet. The ship's clearing came into view, almost there. Valrica ran up the ramp, throwing the crystal into the power chamber. Cover me. I need a few seconds to activate it. Daniel turned, firing at the creatures as they rushed forward. One got too close, and he kicked it back, sending it tumbling. Inside, Valrica's fingers flew across the controls. Come on, come on. Yes. Power restored. The engines roared to life. The ship trembled as the thrusters engaged. Daniel leaped inside as the ramp closed behind him. Go, go, go. Valrica pulled the controls, and the ship lifted off the ground just as the creatures slammed against the hull. The jungle below grew smaller as they ascended, leaving the chaos behind. Daniel collapsed into a chair, breathing heavily. That was too close. Valrica held up the crystal fragment. But it worked. We're free. Daniel grinned. You know, for a Forsaken princess, you sure know how to survive. Valrica smiled softly. And for a reckless human, you're not so bad yourself. The stars stretched before them as they left the planet behind. The danger was over, for now, but Daniel knew that their adventure wasn't ending. It was only just beginning.